no one in the village could forget the silence that settled over the Morales house on that January dawn. Neither the screams nor the blows, nor even a child's weeping shattered the community's soul as much as that emptiness that spread afterwards. For when they finally opened that door, they found inside not just a broken family. It was the reflection of what money, even little, can do when it becomes a ghost among siblings, a shadow that creeps into the blood, into the walls, into the eyes of those who once swore eternal care. All because of an inheritance that should never have divided them, but which in the end brought out the worst in each of them. I am Burgo, and this is Mexico Prohibido. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I invite you to do so now. Here we tell stories that many prefer to keep silent, painful, hidden, full of unanswered questions. Because only by facing the truth, even if it hurts us, can we understand who we are as a society. It all began in Santiago Amoltepec, a community hidden between mountains and fog in the state of Oaxaca. There lived Doña Ernestina Morales, a strong, discreet, and deeply respected woman. She raised her 5 children alone after her husband died in a work accident when the youngest could barely walk. For decades, she sold tamales, embroideries, raised animals. She tended land she had inherited from her parents, which she gradually sold to survive. She did it with patience and dignity. She never complained. In her small notebook, she kept track of every peso, every purchase, every loan. No one knew how much she had, but everyone said she had saved a good sum, and they were right. Upon her death, she left a sum of 480,000 pesos in cash, divided into envelopes in a wooden box under her bed. Beside it, a handwritten note, without signature or authentication, for my children, that they watch over each other and respect each other. That was her kind of will. Simple, maternal, but also naive. The Morales siblings seemed to get along well. Raúl, the eldest, had taken on the role of the absent father for years. Authoritarian, serious, respected by the others. Clara, the third, resembled her mother most. Silent, hard-working, devoted to her 2 small children. Jose had moved north and only returned for major holidays. Teresa, the youngest, never married and lived with her mother at home until her last day. And the other brother, Manuel, kept somewhat distant from everyone, but without apparent conflict. When Ernestina died, it was Raúl who took care of the funeral, the bills, the visits. He was also the one who found the box with the money and the note. He showed it to the rest of the family, telling them he would keep it until they decided together what to do. No one protested. At that moment, the pain was stronger than any thought of inheritance. Weeks passed, then months. The box remained in Raúl's hands, who hid it in a compartment under the cabinet. He said it was so no one would worry, everything would remain the same. But soon, the comments, the doubts, the long glances at family gatherings began. Why didn't Raúl talk about it anymore? What was he doing with the money? Had he perhaps already used some of it? Clara was the first to ask openly. She said she needed to fix the roof of her house, her children were sick, and it was fair to use part of the inheritance. Raúl answered her coldly that this money belonged to everyone, that it was not the right time, that they had to decide together first. But he never called a meeting. He explained nothing further. The tension accumulated like dust in a locked house. Jose returned from the north, after receiving a letter from Teresa telling him that Clara was upset, that Raúl was behaving strangely, that something weird was in the air. Upon his arrival, he found a cold, distant family, split by silence. When he tried to ask about the inheritance, Raúl looked at him as if he were betraying something sacred. Clara's children, 2 little ones aged 5 and 7, began to show signs of deep sadness. The school reported that one of them had come several days without breakfast. A teacher, Maria del Rosario, tried to talk to Clara, who could barely hold back tears. She said everything was fine. They were just difficult times, but her eyes said otherwise. One day, one of the children appeared at the village store and asked for bread on credit. He carried a torn 20-peso bill and said his mother was sick. Maria del Rosario decided to visit the house. What she found took her breath away. An empty kitchen, damp walls, children sleeping on blankets on the floor. Clara sat in the corner, staring into space without the energy to even get up. Quietly, she repeated that her mother's money was hidden, kept, buried alive. Maria tried to alert the authorities. She sent a report to the DIF delegation, but never received a response. No one wanted to meddle in family matters. And meanwhile, in Raúl's house, just a few blocks away, repairs were being made, new furniture installed, a washing machine, a modern stove, even a small television. Some neighbors commented that Raúl had received money. He said it was from his savings, but he never worked outside the village. One night, Clara went to Raúl's house. She knocked heavily on the door. She demanded her share. She said she couldn't take it anymore. Her children had nothing to eat. Raúl did not open. It is said that he shouted from inside that she was an opportunist. Her mother would not have wanted to see her begging. Clara walked away with clenched fists and red eyes. That was the last time anyone heard her speak. Since then, the family did not meet. The holidays passed without hugs. No one called each other. Silence became a habit, a way of protecting themselves from the pain no one wanted to name. But the legacy was still there, not in the box, not in the banknotes, in the walls of every house, in the sad eyes of the children, in the glances that no longer crossed. It got even worse. Because when the break materializes, it always finds a crack, through which everything can shatter. And that crack would open one January morning. When one of the brothers could no longer remain silent and decided to violently enter the house where money, fear, and guilt slept together. It was a cloudy Friday when José returned to the village in the early hours of the morning. He came from Tehuacan, where he had worked for a few days with a cousin on a construction site. As he got off the bus and walked along the main street of Santiago Amoltepec, the first thing he noticed was that everything seemed grayer than usual. It was not just the sky or the dust on the trees, but a dense coldness, as if something invisible had fallen from the mountains on the village. A burden, a wordless sadness. José had not announced his arrival. He went directly to Teresa's house and sought for answers. She looked at him without surprise, as if she had been expecting him. She did not hug him. She only poured him a coffee and told him that nothing was the same anymore, that Clara wasn't speaking, that Raúl had changed, that the money remained a secret and the children no longer wanted to go to school. José, with clenched teeth, asked her to take him to Clara, but Teresa shook her head. She said Clara didn't want to see anyone anymore. That same afternoon, José went to his sister's house. He knocked heavily on the door with his knuckles 3 times. No one answered. He heard footsteps inside, a low murmur, but they didn't open. He knew they were there. He tried it once more. In the end, he only heard Clara's low voice saying she didn't want to talk. He should please leave. Jose stood still, his forehead leaning against the wood. He remembered how as children they played hide-and-seek in the same courtyard, how Clara looked after him while their mother sold in the market. How had they come so far? He then decided to confront Raoul. No more illusions, no more letters, no more silence. He went to his house the next day. He knocked hard. Raoul opened with a harsh expression, his eyes swollen, as if he hadn't slept for days. Jose wasted no time. He told him they had to talk. It was time to distribute what was left of the inheritance. Raoul said, without raising his voice, that nothing was left, that the money had been spent on repairs, payments, needs. Jose demanded proof. Raoul replied that he didn't have to account to anyone. His mother had trusted him. The others had never cared about anything. The words became knives. Jose accused. Raoul defended himself. They shouted old things at each other, old wounds that had been dormant since childhood. In the end, Raoul slammed the door in his face. The dry sound of the wood echoed in Jose's heart, like a blow to his entire family history. After that, Jose returned with a firm decision. He would not let this end like this. Not for him, but for Clara. For the children, for the memory of his mother. He tried by all means to get to the box where the money had once been, but Raoul had hidden or destroyed it. No one knew for sure. Jose said there had to be something left, that it was impossible for almost 500,000 pesos to have disappeared without a trace. Neighbors said they had seen Raoul buying new things. Others asserted he lived as always, but no one could prove anything. One night, Jose appeared at Raoul's house with a metal crowbar. He was unarmed. He did not scream. He did not ask permission. He just pushed open the door, which was ajar, and entered uninvited. Teresa, who lived nearby, heard the noise and was the first to arrive. What she found paralyzed her. In the middle of the hallway, Raoul and Jose struggled. The first screamed for him to leave. He had no right to. The second insisted on wanting to see the box. He needed to know the truth. There was a struggle, a misstep. A dry thud against the stair frame. Raoul fell backward, hitting his head on the floor. Jose stood motionless, breathing heavily. The silence that followed was like the echo of a bottomless well. Teresa screamed for help. The neighbors rushed over. Someone called the village patrol. When the officers arrived, Raoul was unconscious, with blood on his neck. They took him to the nearest health center, but he died en route. The official cause of death was head trauma. The written version was that of a domestic accident in the midst of a quarrel between brothers. But no one in the village believed it was just that. Not because they distrusted Jose, but because everyone knew that the accident was only the tragic end of something that had been festering for years. Raoul's house was sealed by the local police for a few hours. They found no money. They did not find the box. Only old papers, dirty clothes, and some dusty family photos. One of these photos showed the 5 siblings as children, embraced in a hammock, laughing. The image, rescued by a neighbor, was the last intact remnant of what was once the Morales family. Jose was questioned, but not charged. It was classified as an accident. Clara did not go to the funeral. Teresa cried silently, sitting alone at the back of the church. No one else attended. Clara's children were taken by Maria del Rosario, the teacher, who offered herself as their temporary guardian until their situation was resolved. Maria enrolled them in another school, further away from the village. She bought them uniforms. She taught them to pray before bed. One of them asked her one day if their grandmother had left a lot of money. Maria didn't know what to say. She just stroked his head and replied that their grandmother had left love, even if some didn't know how to keep it. Shortly after, Clara disappeared from the village. Some say she moved in with a distant relative in San Pedro Mixtepec. Others say she was admitted to a clinic to treat her depression. No one knows for sure. Teresa remained alone in her mother's house. Every afternoon she goes to the courtyard to water the plants that still grow near the wall, where the wooden box was once buried. She looks silently at the horizon. She waits for no one. The Morales no longer exist as a family. There are no gatherings, no calls, no new photos. Only an echo that reverberates through the village every time someone mentions the word inheritance. In the municipal archive, there is a brief note about the case. Domestic accident, family conflict, deceased, Raul Morales, year 2003. Nothing more. No mention of the money, no mention of the pain. Because there are things that are not in official records, but remain tattooed in the hearts of those who lived them. And sometimes, when night falls over Santiago Amoltepec and the wind blows between the loose roof tiles, some swear to hear a gentle voice, repeating the same words over and over. For my children, that they watch over each other and respect each other. After Raul's death, the whole village was paralyzed. It wasn't just the fact of losing one of their most well-known residents, but the way everything happened between brothers, between blood. A constant whisper ran through every street of Santiago Amoltepec, a murmur that seeped under doors and reached the kitchens, where mothers cooked silently while the children, not understanding everything, asked if Uncle Jose was going to jail. But there was no jail, no judgment, no justice, at least not in the form many had expected. Jose retreated for weeks to a distant cousin's house. He only left for essentials. He spoke to no one. They say he cried at night, shouting his mother's name in his sleep. Others asserted he wrote letters to Clara, though no one knew if he ever sent them. The police did not investigate beyond the initial report. They classified it as a domestic incident with a fatal outcome. It was easier to leave it at that. No one wanted to dig too deeply into a story that smelled of shame and sadness. But deep down, everyone knew this was just the last visible wound of an older, deeper disease. Months passed. Raul's house stood empty, locked with a rusty padlock. Weeds began to overgrow the entrance. The windows, once clean, were now dirty mirrors reflecting neglect. Some said a shadow moved inside at night, as if someone were still there. Others claimed it was imagination, that collective pain had made the whole village sick. Teresa, the younger sister, was the one who kept the memory alive. Not with words, but with gestures. She kept her mother's altar clean. Every Sunday she lit a candle. She recited the verses Ernestina used to repeat when one of her children fell ill or when money was scarce. One of those verses read, "He who sows discord among brothers despises his own soul." She repeated it softly while sweeping the courtyard, like a prayer that sought to restore what was irretrievably broken. But the true burden was carried by Clara, even if she was no longer in the village. Information about her whereabouts was sparse. Maria del Rosario, the teacher, had tried to contact her several times without success. The children, now under her temporary guardianship, barely mentioned her. The elder said his mother cried a lot. The youngest remembered her as a blurry figure, like an echo. Only a few months had passed, yet for them time no longer flowed in the same way. They slept together, embraced, sometimes prayed for their Uncle Jose, sometimes asked why their grandmother had left without giving them clear instructions. Maria del Rosario, a resolute woman with an immense heart, had made the decision to protect them at all costs. She had resigned her position as classroom teacher to focus on their care. She had no children of her own. She said God had entrusted her with this mission, to restore what others had left broken. She enrolled them in a new school. She taught them to grow tomatoes in the courtyard. She told them bedtime stories, many of them invented, so they could dream of worlds where families didn't fall apart over papers or banknotes. One afternoon, while tidying documents for the application for final custody, Maria found a sheet of paper folded 4 times in the eldest boy's school bag. A letter. Written in childish handwriting, it said, "My grandma left money. My uncles fought. One died. I don't want money. I want my mum to come back." She couldn't help but cry. Sometimes children say in 6 words what adults hide in 1,000 silences. The impact of the story began to extend beyond the village. A reporter from a regional newspaper learned about the case and wanted to write an article about it. Maria firmly refused. She would not allow this tragedy to be sensationalized. But the story had already spread by word of mouth, like a wildfire in dry leaves. Each version was different. In some, Raúl was a thief. In others, Jose was a murderer. No one mentioned Ernestina, nor her words written on that simple sheet she had left under her bed. Words never notarized, but weighing more than any signature. In time, rumors about the money's whereabouts surfaced. A neighbor claimed Raúl had buried it in the backyard of the house. Another asserted a strange woman had taken a box on the night of the incident. It was even said that Clara, before leaving, had returned in the early hours of the morning and taken what little was left. But no one could prove anything. The fact was that of the 480,000 pesos, there was no trace. The money had evaporated, like the heat evaporates after the rain, leaving only moisture and marks on the walls. Jose, for his part, decided to leave Oaxaca. He went to Monterrey to work with an old friend. Before leaving, he visited his mother's grave. He brought no flowers, only a folded sheet with the same message Ernestina had written, "For my children, that they watch over each other and respect each other." He left it there, in a small glass bottle. Perhaps he hoped that someone would find it one day. Perhaps he hoped for forgiveness. In the village, everything continued, but nothing was the same. The families began to speak more openly about their conflicts. Some tried to legalize their possessions. Others reread their wills. The story of the Morales became a silent warning, a mirror many did not want to look into. Clara's children grew up silently. The elder began to write stories in which families reunited in the end. The younger said that when he grew up, he would build a house where everyone could live without fighting. Maria del Rosario listened to them, smiled, but in her heart she carried a fear that one day when they were adults, they would look for answers that no one could give them anymore. One afternoon, while tidying an old chest at the school, where she worked part-time, she found a folded photograph among forgotten books. It was an old picture, 5 children playing in the dirt, forming circles with stones. In the corner, in shaky handwriting, it said, Summer 75. She recognized Clara, Raúl, José, Teresa, and Manuel, all together, all laughing, all before their world broke. She looked at the photo for a long time. Then she put it in her pocket. She said nothing. But that night, before going to bed, she placed it on the altar where she lit a candle every Sunday. She closed her eyes and in her prayer asked not for justice, nor truth, nor punishment. She only said, Lord, give us the peace we could not give each other. More than 2 years had passed since Raúl lost his life in his own home. In Santiago Amoltepec, the case was no longer a recurring topic of conversation, but it was never forgotten. Like it happens with the most painful stories, it transformed into a shadow that wandered through the corridors of collective memory. One that no one mentioned aloud, but that everyone remembered when the air grew denser and silence felt heavier than usual. Clara's children, now a little older, had found a home full of tranquility in Maria del Rosario, though without answers. The elder, who already wrote fluently and read voraciously, began to ask difficult questions. He wanted to know why his mother didn't call him, if she would ever call again, why the villagers avoided their gaze when they walked across the square. The younger, on the other hand, preferred silence. He clung to his teacher's neck when someone spoke of families, grandparents, inheritances. In his innocence, he still believed that they would one day wake up in their original house, with his mother preparing tortillas and his uncle laughing in the courtyard. Maria del Rosario, patient, as only women who have experienced more suffering than they tell can be, answered them with disguised stories. Sometimes, in the middle of reading, she would shed a tear, remembering Clara, whom she hadn't seen since the day she left. For a long time, she tried to find her whereabouts. She called the few contacts she had in other villages, discreetly inquired at offices, even wrote a letter to San Pedro Mixtepec, hoping that someone would reply. No answer ever came. Clara's absence became a mystery. Some said she lived in a small house near the coast, that she cleaned hotels and had changed her name. Others asserted that a relative had taken her to the United States. But there were also those who, with that cruelty dressed in concern, hinted that she might have lost her mind, that she lived in a psychiatric center in the capital. Maria, without evidence, preferred to believe that Clara was silently taking care of herself, that she had not given up, but was waiting for the right moment to return. Meanwhile, Teresa continued to inhabit the old family home. Every corner spoke of the past. Ernestina's rocking chair by the window, the wood stove she still used out of habit, the improvised altar with dried flowers. She never married, never had children. Her life revolved around keeping the memory of the deceased alive. It was as if her existence had transformed into a silent promise, not to let oblivion cover everything with its gray cloak. One October afternoon, while Teresa was tidying an old cardboard box she found in the attic, she discovered something unexpected. A small notebook, its cover worn by time. Upon opening it, she discovered her mother's notes. Inside, hours, accounts, savings. In between, a sheet folded 4 times, handwritten in Ernestina's firm, calm handwriting. The text read, "If anything happens to me, this money is equally for my children. Nothing is worth more than their unity. Distribute no resentment. Distribute love." Teresa froze. Not because of the words, which she already knew in some way, but because at the end of the sheet, in newer ink, there was another note, written by someone else. All is lost. I'm sorry. Mama. It was Raoul's handwriting. This discovery shook everything in her. She couldn't understand when he had written it, or why he had left it there. Perhaps it had been an act of remorse, a confession he never dared to make aloud. Or perhaps it was just the last attempt of a man who realized too late the damage he had caused. Teresa took the notebook to Maria del Rosario. The teacher read it silently, without judgment. Then she gave it back to her and told her to keep it safe. That one day, when the children were adults, they would have the right to know this part of the story, that perhaps in those words they would find some peace. Meanwhile, José lived a simple daily life in Monterrey. He worked in construction, slept in a small rented room, sent Teresa some money every month. He didn't talk much to anyone. His co-workers considered him a serious but friendly man. Some said one could see an old sadness in his eyes. Every now and then he wrote letters to his nieces and nephews, but he never sent them. He kept them in a metal box, along with a photo of his mother and a small wooden cross. In one of these letters, it said, "I don't know how to explain everything that happened to you. Sometimes we adults make decisions we think are right, and later we realize we were only fleeing from pain. Forgiveness if I failed. Forgiveness if I was silent. The burden of guilt does not disappear with the years. It only changes its form." In José's case, it became silence, to nightly prayers, to solitary church visits, to the inability to talk about his family without his eyes welling up. One day, while working on the renovation of an old house, he found an old Bible among the rubble. Inside, it was an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe and a handwritten sheet that said, "Family is the only treasure that cannot be inherited. It is cared for, it is built, it is respected." He took it as a sign. He put it in his pocket, and that night wrote another letter, this time addressed to Clara. In it, he asked for her forgiveness. He told her that, although he didn't know where she was, he wanted her to know that he always thought of her, that he wished her well, that her children were wonderful. He told her that he loved her, even though time and pain had come between them. He did not send it, but for the first time when he finished it, he felt a little relief. In Santiago Amoltepec, Maria del Rosario organized a small ceremony with the children to celebrate their grandmother's birthday. They placed flowers on the altar, lit candles, and read aloud a prayer they had written themselves. It read, "Thank you for protecting us from heaven. Forgive us if we did not keep your gift. We promise to be different. We promise not to forget." It was an intimate moment, without an audience, without cameras, without speeches, just the three of them, kneeling before a flickering candle, trying to put back together what resentment had broken into anger. Maria, watching them, felt a lump in her throat. She knew that these children's path would not be easy, that they would carry questions, doubts, perhaps even reproaches. But she also knew that within them was such a pure seed of love that if they could protect it, it would one day blossom into something beautiful, because amidst every tragedy, there is still room for hope. And sometimes that hope arises in the most wounded hearts, where the light seems distant, but is never truly absent.